All right, Hot Breathiverse. Welcome back to Hot Breath Live. Comedians on Skype talking comedy. This is the show where you learn comedy from the pros. If you're watching this on YouTube, just be aware that all the questions are being asked in our Facebook group. So go into the description, request to join the group, and then you can start connecting with guests like today's guest out of over 200 interviews with comedians. He has been on the get list from the beginning. I was actually going to fly to New York to interview this gentleman before the pandemic. So now, lucky for you, you also get to be a part of this by asking your own questions in the Facebook group. So without further ado, welcome to Hot Breath, the one and only Jesse David Fox, ladies and gentlemen. Give it up for Jesse David Fox, everyone. Yes.
I'm imagining them clap. Thank you for it.
Yes, there's a sound effect. There's a clapping sound effect people are hearing. So no worries there. So first off, thank you for doing this. I'm a huge fan. You've definitely been an inspiration for this show and just what's possible within a podcast and within the comedy world. So I had a lot of questions as an interviewer, but then also as a comedian. So I want to take a page out of your book and use a case study of one of your interviews to kind of interweave all my questions. So
great idea. That's a really good idea.
Thought went into that. Don't worry. This was not spontaneous. As soon as I got confirmation, I was like, all right, everything Jesse David Fox, everything. Just like when I booked Cedric the Entertainer, I had like 24-hour notice. So for that entire time, I was just saturating my brain with Cedric the Entertainer, everything. So for you, a lot of people may not know that Good One, the idea was sparked when you interviewed Jerry Seinfeld, and he said the most interesting thing he likes to talk about is jokes, and you were like, oh, well, there's a show. So I thought we could dive into that interview as like a case study on the entire process of starting out with even how were you able to book Jerry Seinfeld for the interview?
Well, I'm trying to think. That was 3 or 4. It was probably around 4 years ago or 5 years ago, like to the day. I mean, I've been working at Vulture now for 7.5 years, and just as timetable, I've been working at Vulture for 7.5 years. I've been doing the podcast for about 3 years. But of my many jobs at Vulture, one is booking Vulture Festival, which is a annual festival we do with like panels and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was, I believe, that might even have been the second year, second or third year, and we were just like thinking of people to reach out to. I was always a fan of Jerry, and we reached out. Coincidentally, that weekend was the weekend before the new season of Comedians in Cars was coming out.
Mm-hmm.
So he had something to promote. So it just timing worked, and they're like, fine, we'll do this thing. I think the reason he agreed, first, someone else did an interview with him for Vulture. It wasn't me, but he liked that interview fine enough.
Oh.
And then for me to do it, I sent him clips of things I wrote about comedy. I have not heard back if he read it or if just his team reviewed it and it's like, oh, this person knows what he's talking about. But that was sort of it, which was sort of like I proved that I knew what I was doing. I'm trying to think if I had interviewed John Mulaney by that point. Like I did this big John Mulaney interview, and that was sort of it, which was just sort of like, you want to do this thing. I proved I knew enough about comedy, and he didn't really have any expectations because he does stuff like this probably periodically, and he doesn't like it. He just like, well, I'll do it,
right?
Because that's part of the job, but. I don't think he had any expectations of it necessarily being like a thing he would enjoy doing.
Yeah, and with booking guests, is it primarily because it is with him? It was the timing of Comedians in Cars.
Yeah.
So there's a promotional angle you can spin on it when you're pitching guests, but is it mostly when you're booking a guest? Are you going through a publicist? Is it some of them are friends, but what? We want to start booking bigger guests on this show, Jesse. How do we do it?
It's all through. A lot of it's through publicists.
Okay.
Even the people I know, I book through their publicists because if they have a publicist, that means they want the publicist to be doing work, and that means they don't want to have to maintain their own schedule, and it's just like way easier. Like a lot of people say yes, and then be like, but not really know when they can do it. They pay a person to like tell them when they should be doing interviews. So it's always usually through publicists, unless I sort of see someone's going to be in town. So I'm like, hey, you're going to be in town, you want to do it? But sometimes it's through managers. And we'll get pitched movies or TV shows in general from being the site, and then I'll usually just float the idea through those pitches. Like, oh, they're pitching a movie, and I'll be like, oh, this person's in the movie, or Netflix I have a good relationship with Netflix because I've done a lot of them. So they'll be like, these are specials we have coming up who you'd be interested in, and they've helped do that relationship. And then, but it's like pegs are useful if it means people are doing press that wouldn't normally do press, but I don't necessarily need to do it. I think sometimes, especially with stand-up specials, it's good to have a little break so they're not just sort of in junket mode where they're answering the same things over and over again. Also, you can then sort of you can ask them questions based on the things they've already answered a million times. So it varies. It used to be based on if I'm going to be in LA, I reach out to certain people, and if people are going to be in New York. Obviously now it's a lot different because everything's done in my apartment.
And did you say pegs?
Like pegs, sorry, like news pegs is to use jargon.
What a news
like a peg is something to have a reason for why someone's doing press. So like the release of a TV show is
Gotcha. And when you're reaching out to a publicist, is it do you have a press kit attached to the email? Do you have like a template that you use?
I should use a template, but for some reason I write the email out every time, where it just sort of explains what the show is, explaining who the guests have been, and I try to curate that based on either who's most famous, who I know the comedian would think is most famous, who are clients of the publicity firm, and then some like rough numbers. I think also as the show's gotten more popular, and just as it's gotten more popular, so more people know of it, but also as more publicists know of it because I've worked with their firm, I just sort of like, do they want to do a good one, and they already know what it is. Because when a thing is like, these publicists work together. So when a thing is seen as a good opportunity, like people know, like, oh, our comedy clients, we should try to get them on this show.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So yeah, moving on. I'm coming from the bottom up. You're now at like top where people are like reaching up to you. So I'm trying to get like, what is that climb? But you opened up with Jim Gaffigan, so it's kind of like the show starts with Jim Gaffigan, so it's quite an impressive roster from the jump.
Yeah, I mean, I did Neil and Jim Gaffigan. I recorded in the same day. The first two interviews I did for the show were those the same day. And Jim, he just was pitched, and he had a special coming out, and I had enough reputation from just writing in general that publicists knew one. And Neil I had interviewed before, but then the fact that I had Neil and Jim was a lot. That like helped me get at certain people. Christian Shaw I sort of knew from interviewing her in the past, and so that like the first season was a lot of people that I knew. Like the first few episodes were like I had some relationship with, or except for Weird Al, which was like a complete shot in the dark. And he just said, and like he was promoting a small thing. I couldn't believe he said yes. And then from then it felt like I had big enough names that I was able to sort of have like enough people that I can point to.
Gotcha.
And then I just kept on going. And then like more famous people. And then it's like, at this point, like I have like famous people on the show. That's like part of the show.
Right. Awesome. So let's get into the interview preparation side of it as well, because that's something I value not only in this show and doing research, but then in researching you about your research and hearing that we share a lot of the same practices where we may be listening to an interview at double speed while reading an article about that person, while maybe having their Twitter, like just constantly just absorbing. and really trying to learn from all of their different interviews and kind of distilling it into one. So when it came to interviewing Jerry Seinfeld, like what is that preparation like? Because you had a whole list in the interview that people can see on YouTube. It's amazing. You have papers on stage. Like, what is the interview prep for Jerry Seinfeld?
I'm trying to remember. I forgot that there's a video of it, so you can see. I mean, I always like long form paper just because that's how my brain visualizes. A lot of people are next cards, but I don't memorize order as much as I do space.
Mm-hmm.
So Jerry, I knew there are certain things I wanted to hit because it was supposed to be wide ranging, but start with comedians in cars, and I knew. Like I was not planning on people necessarily being able to watch it. I just sort of like, I want to entertain the audience. I want to sort of like move along to different topics. And I knew I didn't want to talk about certain things. And then, so I'm trying to think how much work I did for that. I mean, I did less work than I do now, or at least, especially at the peak of the show. But I mean, I watched all the comedians in cars. I read every interview I could find, but I didn't like, and I skimmed his sort of book, but I didn't like really like, let me read every interview he did in the 80s and try to find that, or, which is something I probably would have done at the time in the show where I was sort of at a peak. There was this one thing I listened to, which was, he did this one interview, you can buy as a CD. Mike Birbiglia told me about it. It's called like On Comedy.
On Comedy? Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. And so I listened to that, because I didn't need to get so deep. I was just trying to get a sense of the types of things he liked to talk about, because when you're doing public interviews, like in front of people where you're trying to, the conversation should flow more. You can't edit it. It should be fun for the audience in a different way. You should be setting people up to sort of be able to like talk for a few minutes on end and be more performative. You are not trying to surprise them or talk to things that might be sort of complicated to get into. You're trying to do shorter questions. So I was thinking about it sort of that way, a lot of it. So I knew like, we like talking about like the idea of marriage as a subject, I think was the thing. And I asked him about that. And I remember that was a sort of a sample of the type of thing I do now, which is he gave a short answer to a question that I wanted a longer answer from, right? It's like someone will in an interview say like really just like an offhand thing where Jerry's like, marriage is like the most interesting thing in the world, and then he'll just sort of move on and then whatever, where I'm like, well, talk about that more. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like, honestly, it's like a thing I learned from having a therapist, which is just sort of like, you'll answer something and they'll just say like, can you talk more about that? And I think it's like a really useful interview technique in general, which is don't let a person, like people sometimes are in a rush to finish answering. So just be like, no, just keep on going. Like, you're being interesting. I'm going to ask, so it was a little bit of that, which is like, I know he's interested in this. Let's try to get him to talk about it longer. And some things worked other than others. The example you brought about Jerry Seinfeld talking about his favorite thing to talk about his jokes is, the rest of the quote is something like, but it's really boring to these people. Right. And that was a moment where I'm like, I found that very annoying. Like it's burned with me because it's like traumatic. So I'm like, I promise you this is interesting to these people, but I couldn't say that then. I also didn't have like tons of questions about it, so it didn't matter. But I also was doing other things at festival, so I couldn't like give every single thing I had to it.
Gotcha.
Compared to what I do now, where it's like I prepare and that's the only thing I'm thinking about for as long as I can think about it.
Yeah, and you've said that you actually, when you prepare, it's you falling in love with the guest, and then the interview is like saying what I love about them.
It's not telling the person I love them to their face, because I think that'd be weird to them. Well, it's trying to convey to the audience what is lovable about them through my eyes. I guess is probably a better way of putting it. Like, it's it's trying to leave people with the perception of the person that I have. And you can only do the best you can, but like, I think it's trying to see people as I see them and the way you see a person when you're in love with them. So it's like being with an extreme amount of empathy of like not being things that you might have a problem with about them, or oh, you don't like this part of the joke, or you think this is maybe hacky or just not that interesting. You still try to like love that part of it and try to have them expound upon it in a way that makes them seem interesting or whatever. And I think it's really about, it's helping people understand how to appreciate comedians better, I guess, is a lot of it. And understanding that they're all different people with sort of like unique sensibilities and ideas of what they're trying to do.
One of my favorite comedians, Alonzo Bowden, just did a Q&A with us, and he was talking about a lot of people think comedy is talking, but it's actually listening. And with interviewing, listening is something I've had to work very hard on, even to you responding then. And I'm looking for a moment. You said something about having a therapist, and then instead of me listening to what's next, I'm like, oh, but should I find a place to shoehorn that I researched that his dad's a therapist and that he has a psychology degree at Maryland, but I should be listening to what he's saying instead. So, like, how do you stay in the moment? Or if Jerry Seinfeld does say something like, I like talking about jokes, even though these people think it's boring, how do you not then go off and be like, oh, that's a show that's really going to take off? You stay in the moment with him.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I would not call myself a great listener, as podcasters are, or like interviewers are supposed to be or tend to be. I am a very thorough planner or thinker, I guess would be, which is, how would I put it? I have a good sense of where the answers are going to go. Even if they've never talked about it before, I have whatever it is, I have a rhythm in my head, and I call it a story-driven interview in so much as that I have an arc in which we're trying to go. And my brain moves quick enough, and I have a good enough memory of everything that I was going to ask, because they are sort of natural extensions of where the conversation is supposed to go, that I'm able to sort of sort it out. I mean, when it's audio only, it's a lot easier because you can just pause a little bit and you can say, what was I going to say? And I have all the papers out, when I set up to do the interviews, usually when it's in person, I have all my questions typed out. I have the joke typed out. Usually I type out all the joke, or find someone, or I'll have an intern do it. I don't find the process of typing out the joke itself is like, revelatory. It's just sort of like, it's useful to have it so I can know where in the joke I am timeline wise. And I'll have the research there, even though I never look at the printout of the research that I do. But it's like, I need sort of a certain amount of like scatteredness to like be able to sort of focus in. And it really is, just trying to do. I mean, it's ultimately doing two things at once. I mean, I think that's like ultimately when I think about what happens in those moments. Like in the Moshe Kasher interview, he jumped ahead to a thing that was going to ask. Like he was talking about a thing that was going to talk. That happens more than anything else, which is someone brings up a thing before I want them to, and then I have to decide if I want to talk about that then, or if it messes up the flow and I bring it up later. And as I've been doing more of these, I'm just getting quicker at deciding that and thinking about what it means. I mean, sometimes I've re-edited interviews to go in the order where it needed to go.
What?
Not often. I mean, once I learned, Mark Maron, his interviews are like completely edited.
No, I didn't know that.
And for the 1000th episode, he did an interview with his producer, and they explained that like his producer will completely rearrange things if it's necessary for the rhythm of it. And I don't do that.
Huh.
Because Mark essentially, Mark has no plan, so it's just sort of like instinctual. So sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. because I have a plan, I don't need to do that, but sometimes I will do it if it is necessary. And what was I going to say? 1 second, my cat.
Was that Bug?
I have to let my cat out.
No, you're fine. Yeah, no worries at all.
In 1 second, because she's going crazy. She's going too crazy for this.
No worries. All right, great questions, everyone. Keep commenting with them. We're about to jump into your questions. I'm just selfishly taking this time to also ask him questions. So keep commenting with them, and we're gonna get to them. And we appreciate you hanging out with us.
I had too much faith in my cat's ability to just chill, and so I was like, "You gotta get out of here."
It's all good. Rosebud Baker had to let her dog in and out, and it was no worries. I think Tone Bell, his dog, in the first interview we did together, his dog was barking the whole time. Like it's all part of it.
When I interviewed Maria Bamford, her dogs were there. The first time I interviewed Maria Bamford for the podcast, her dogs were there, and they were like, one was snoring, and I thought it was like kind of cute, and then we were like, that's fine. And then my producer that I had at the time was like, this is so annoying. I was like, yeah, I guess when you don't see the dog, it's it's actually very distracting. But that was in the moment where I'm like, it's fine to have the dog. And then I was like, in post, I was like, we got to take this dog out.
Did you do it?
So to answer your question, the dog, I don't think you can hear the dog.
You took the dog? Wow, okay.
Yeah. But yeah, so I was saying about being, it's just really, really knowing. It's interesting because it's not like I reread my questions over and over again. I just sort of have a sense of where they are and the type of things they want to do and try to keep it on track and feel like it's going in order. And if someone's jumping ahead, decide if, this is too interesting sounding to a listener, that they're going to be like, wait, what is that? I need to know what he's talking about right now. And it would be distracting if I don't bring it up. Or it's like, they only mention it partly in a mess of things. I can bring it up in a different context later and say, you said this earlier. Because ultimately, you only ask one question afterwards, and that's the nature of how interviews go. Mm-hmm. So people understand you're going to bring up things people have said in and since that's kind of what I do anyway, which is you said this once, it's fine. Ultimately what they're saying, they said before. I was planning on acknowledging they said it before, so it doesn't really matter that much. You just sort of have to relax and you already have the story that you're going to want to tell.
This reminds me of epic bombs of doing interviews. I always ask comedians on here their worst bombing story, but maybe for you, what's an interview, and this could be from good one or one you've done in the past, where everything goes wrong? I've had interviews where the SD card fills up, and then if it's over the phone drops, then the batteries die. I've had all of it go wrong. What about for you?
I'm trying to think of technical difficulties. I had a lot of technical difficulties with the Chelsea Peretti one, audio-wise, but otherwise the interview was great. Mm-hmm. Before Good One, when I was just a guy who would interview people as part of junkets, where they're doing 30 phone calls, 15 minutes each, and I'm one of them. And they don't know who you are. They barely heard what publication they're talking to. And to maintain any sort of sanity as that, you have to not be a person. So I remember when I did Kevin Hart, it was just sort of the first time. So this is not for the podcast. Mm-hmm. He was just sort of not there. I was supposed to interview him at 4:30 on a Friday, but it kept on being pushed back, and I was talking to him now at 7:30 on a Friday, and we only had 15 minutes. They knocked it down to 10 or whatever, and then he just sort of wasn't there. And I don't begrudge him. I found it very frustrating, but because at even that time I was trying hard to be interesting, but he just sort of couldn't be interesting in that moment because he couldn't be at all present because you try to like dehumanize yourself when you do those junkets. When I interviewed Kevin the other time, he was very busy, but I was the only interview he was doing. Like, he was on the set of Jumanji. I was in his trailer. He had to leave in the middle to shoot a scene, and we picked it up. But he was there. He gave me a lot of time. I think Kevin's brain moves very quickly, so he is a challenging interview in some ways. But like, he was there and he's present, and he like tried hard, which is like not what you can say for a lot of people, especially that famous, to like feel like they want to be good in interviews. So like that was one. But since I had good one, they all would have worked. I think by the time I got to more famous people, they had people I had interviewed that they respected on, so they knew that this was something to respect. I don't know what happened. Somewhere along the way, comedians decided to like treat me nicely. I think I've had some hard time with live episodes because certain performers like feel the need to be the persona when they do live episodes. But those are the only ones where I'm like, oh, I wish I had more time, because live episodes tend to be a hard out. So those are the only ones. But, nothing where it's like bombed, where I'm like, I don't think we can release that. Yeah, I'm trying to think. If I'm like, I know I've had conversations like, we're going to have to do some work to take out the boring parts, but like, or it's too long. But even in those, I won't say which one, but there are certain people who sort of like talk in ways, and it was like, a lot of this is very boring, but a lot of it's very interesting. And I know my brain sparked enough of like, this is an interesting thing to know there's interesting stuff in there. And I just like, take out all the boring parts, and then it's fine. And you wouldn't know, you'd be none the wiser.
Yeah, I've done the same, especially with earlier interviews. Now I don't edit interviews, but early days I would edit out a lot of the filler words, my ums and ahs, and there were a few interviews where I was like, this could be sped up, this could be moved along a little bit, but now I just kind of keep them as is.
I mean, like, if you could do it, I mean, it's I don't edit them because I do the editing in terms of like the structure, and I'm just like, I tell the producer, and I've worked with a variety of producers along the way, it's like, if it's boring to you, it's boring. There's enough stuff. Like, as long as we get to the end point that I wanted to get to, and there's times, I can't remember which interviews, but there's times where I fish for endings to feel full circle, and I ask one, I'm like, that's it, but while I have enough time, let me ask this other thing, and the other thing doesn't work. And I'm like, take out the other thing.
And that's the perks of having a producer. This is a one-man band here, so it is kind of like, I don't want to have to spend another 15 hours on this episode.
No, 100%. I want to do a podcast if I had to listen to myself and like think, because to me, like, once I've heard the information, I kind of get bored by it. So if I've done a full interview, I'm like, I already know all this, and you're like, but the listener doesn't. So I'm always trying to remember, the listener hasn't listened to 70 interviews with this person. They might have like vaguely remember one at most, even if they're fans. So I try to like and account for that part of it at least.
Okay, so we've gone through almost the entire arc of the interview here, and then we're going to get into questions. Now, post-interview, I'd be interested, we could take this to the Jerry Seinfeld, because getting to talk to him as a person is like, I remember before the interview, he's asking you, are you nervous? And he's kind of poking at you. It seems like he enjoys to do with people. What about like post-interview? Was there a conversation, or was he gone?
He was great. I don't know if I probably haven't shared this part of the story as much because it comes off as bragging. He loved the interview. His publicist was like, he hates doing press and he loved doing that. Like, immediately, he really enjoyed doing it. He was really nice to me. He was really nice to my family. My family was there, and he took pictures with all my family. I don't think he must have taken a picture with me. But he was just like, where are you from? Oh, blah, blah. And then he said, like, I always can't remember the exact quote, but I do probably bring it up where he said, "You're really interested in jokes, or you really care about jokes, or something like that." And I knew what he meant, which was for like for not a comedian. I think Jerry is a person who's sort of like there's people that are comedians and there's people who are not comedians, and he only likes comedians. And if he likes you, you're now a comedian a little bit. Like Comedians and Cars with Coffee has comedians on it, but it also will have like his friends that are now comedians because he thinks they're good. And I think part of the reason in the interview, I proved that I was with it, that I was able to move things along, that just like I got it. And I think he talks to so many people who don't get it, that he was just so relieved, and he wasn't there long. We weren't like hanging out, but he just really enjoyed doing it. That's why he allowed me to release it as a podcast like years later. They're like, "Oh, Jerry wants to do it." They were like, as long as it doesn't preclude him doing the podcast at a later time, which we still haven't set up, he'd be happy to do it. I mean, who knows? I mean, like, he had a special he didn't feel like doing a lot of press around it, so we didn't do it. I mean, maybe he has a book coming out. I'll try to do around the book, but
me too. Then I'll reach out to his publicist too. Then
I think so. That's the time for him to do it. I mean, like, he really cares about comedy like a lot, and I think I interviewed. By the time I interviewed, it was 5 years ago, and already the discourse has changed, but he was still coming from a time where it seemed like no one cared anything at all about comedy, and I think he's aware now that people do. So I wouldn't be like, I can't remember if this came up in an interview or just in general, where he's like, I think he'd want to do a master class, if I had a guess, of like what he'd do with his free time. Like, I think he really wants to teach comedy. I interviewed Jeff Garland. I was talking to him about something about it was either something Chris Rock said or something Jerry Seinfeld said. Because that's the thing with Jerry and Chris Rock too. They have these rules that they think are like that they're the freaking kings of all comedy. But the truth is they both, and especially Jerry, like, has all these ideas of what comedy should be. And I think he'd have an opportunity to like talk about a space where he doesn't think he has to appeal to sort of like the mass audience that he's already appealed to so much, that I think he'd like appreciate just like, oh, I'm free to be as boring as I want to be.
Perfect. So let's jump into questions. I've been selfishly holding up this time, asking my own questions. We'll let fans, and we call our hot breath-averse. We call us all hot brethren and sister in here. So let's get to their questions. So Gregory Hardy asks, hi, Jesse. When you're finding yourself chatting with a comic in the real world as opposed to on your show, do you have go-to conversation icebreakers or something you want to know, especially if it's someone you're meeting for the first time?
I mean, I'm not like a chatty person. So in some ways, no. Like, I don't just like talk to people. If I'm meeting a person for the first time in an unstructured setting, I'm just not going to talk to them. Unless I've already interacted with them like on Twitter or whatever, and then I'm like, oh, we've already interacted on Twitter. I'm this person. But so my most chatting is like when they first come to do the podcast, and I'm like, hi, I'm the person. Thank you for doing the show. I'll tell them what it is. But to answer their question, ultimately, when I do find myself in a time to chat with them, like, be it afterwards, I have a certain amount of gossip because I know a lot of comedians, like, tangentially. So, like, comedians like to gossip a lot, and they like to talk about it. And it's not even like, it's like partly talking trash, but it's a lot of just like, this person got this opportunity. Why do you think that is? Like, I have a certain amount of insights on the industry that I think a lot of comedians don't have, that I can be like, oh, this is why they got this is why they got that, this is what I heard about this person, this is why this person, I heard this person's hard to work with. So I think there's a little
Oh,
bit of
who?
No. I think everyone's hard to work with. That's the thing. I mean, like, anyone can be. There's only so many people who are easy to work with, and that means they're just sort of like so competent, so easily capable that like they have time to be nice and present with everybody. Most people are not that confident in their abilities and already so talented that they could not just have to focus on their work. So in my opinion, almost no one's easy to work with. Most people are difficult in some ways. I mean, like, if you have an opinion about how things are, you're going to be in a situation where someone has a different opinion and then you're immediately difficult to work with. And obviously that is also like the idea of being difficult is also tends to be incredibly, the people who tend to be how do I put this? There are certain people who get let off the hook a lot easier for being difficult to work with. And I think when white men are deemed difficult to work with, it's like they get to be geniuses, not like difficult actresses are in the same way. So you're aware. That said, in a gossip situation, you can talk about all the stuff you want to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I tend to do. I don't ask them about comedy. I'll ask them like what they're doing in town, if they need restaurant recommendations or whatever. But on the basics, like I'm not like chit chatting if I like see a comedian I sort of like barely know.
Cool. And this ties into the next one when we talk about meeting comics. This is from Imri. He asks, do you get nervous in the past interviewing these famous people, and how do you calm your nerves?
Yeah, I mean, I used to get really nervous before I interviewed anybody. It felt, I get nervous when I talk to anyone that I'm going to mess up. Like, I don't like talking on the phone usually because like that anticipation I really had a hard time with. And that was really up until the point and I interviewed Jerry. And then once I got through that and once it went well, I was like, well, if I can do that, I can do that with sort of anyone. Like if I can get through that. And what I started to realize is like, and this is the case often, I think also with stand-up, which is sort of like nervousness and excitement are the same feeling. It's just sort of how you're coding it. So like I am still feeling the feeling of nerves, but I understand like that as part of what is exciting, especially for live things. So many things can go wrong, but then once I'm on stage, it's fine. Like I think with anything, I get to a point where I'm like, well, it's too late now is what I'll say. Like it's too late now to back up. I have to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is sort of, that carries me through. And then once you're on it and you're doing it, you realize like they have to answer the questions. They have the harder job. I already did all the work is what I say to myself.
Yeah.
You already did all the work. You already wrote the questions down. They're here. You're just going to say these out loud. And so that was a lot of it. I think with the podcast, I was nervous the show would be bad. And I'm like, how do I make it not bad? Oh, this is going to be boring. Every moment I was nervous it was going to be not interesting. And that made the interview really stressful or tense, or the opposite would happen where I'd have my nerves calm so much that I would be like, now I'm not interested to do this. I'm like, well, I already know everything. And that changed when I interviewed Jesus and Mero because they were so fun and so fast and so present that I'm like, oh yeah, this show is fun. That's like why I did it. That's what the listeners like, is that I'm there to have fun, and like the listeners like do enjoy having me be a surrogate to be appreciating these people. Like I remember when I was interviewing Nate Bargatze, I was nervous or just like feeling like, oh no, how's it gonna go? And I was like, I think this guy talks funny. When he talks, I think it sounds funny. He has a funny cadence. Literally just listen to it. And then and that's sort of what I did, which is like I've taken that energy and I try to like figure out how to make it into excitement and like have that and not be afraid of being excited, like having people actually hear that.
Oh, that's funny. It's similar to like being a comedian. Like if you're having fun on stage, the audience will have fun. So it's fun how that translates.
Yeah, I mean that is one of the better trends of the last 20 years of comedy. Comedians were allowed to have fun on stage. So like that was like Dave Chappelle was like I think really big on the like laughing at himself. I can't remember a comedian before him that laughed at himself so much and was also considered good. Like like now everyone does it. Like, but like his cohort, and like if you look at like a lot of the like New York school like killing type people, they're like, you gotta be serious and like angry at the crowd or whatever.
Right.
And you're like, why? Who's that for? Like, and it's like rooted in all these ideas of like toughness, but it's like I think if Dave Chappelle didn't find himself funny on stage, his like entire persona would fall apart. And like you see that with everybody. I mean, like if you could naturally, organically convey joy, not force it, like, but actually organically convey that to a level, like if you, I mean, like Kristen Shaw is like maybe one of the greatest ever at it. Like it is truly infectious, and like part of your job is to make people feel better. Like being funny, broadly defined, is the goal, and being interesting. But like part of it is like people are trying to have fun. Like that is allowed.
Mm-hmm.
Fun is not antithetical to the goal of being a comedian.
Yeah, I just did a special review of Chris D'Elia's new special and was looking at how he uses smiling and laughing as almost tags to his material. It's very powerful and effective.
Yeah, I mean it's I mean it's partly persona comedy, right? It's like ultimately by the time you get big enough, people like want to just hang out with you. So like they want you to just be yourself on stage, and you don't have to. And certain comedians care about that more than others. Certain people are like, I'm fine getting whatever laughs I can get. Like I've worked my entire life to get fans. Let me give them what they want. Where some people, I think, resent their fans or don't accept easy laughs from their fans, or they try to figure out. It's a balance that's really hard. Like you need fans to allow yourself to push yourself more to do. You have fans meaning you have a more patient audience, which is useful because that means you can do something more interesting. But they also it's really forgiving, and it can allow you to sort of like do nothing. So that's always what I find it fascinating when I talk to comedians, what the relationship to their audience is and how it changes and where it's at different points. It's one of like the many things I probably ask every comedian about it in a certain way.
All right. So let's we're at 45 minutes right now. Can we do like through 2 more questions?
Yeah, I mean I have nothing else to do today, so it's like whatever.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, everyone quarantined. Yeah, it's been we've just been throwing some Hail Marys for these Q&As. Like that's why I asked you about booking guests, because I'm like, I'm just going to start reaching out to like Seinfeld and like Tom Papa and like Sinbad and just shoot for the moon here.
I mean, I try to think about who might have a mic, because the audio quality without a mic for us is hard. But if people are also actors or like script writers, they still are busy. That is the one thing. Like, or they're saving their press. I mean, like there's certain people I've been able to get that are like excited to do it because this is all they're trying to do this week. But some people are parents, right? So they're like, you have to think about if because they're a comedian, that means their job during this time is to be a full-time parent. Like all that stuff is things that you have to think about of like, okay, how am I factoring now into this person just trying to get through this?
Okay. So let me try to amalgamize these, because we have people asking somewhat of the similar questions. So what we'll do is we'll combine these two. Kyle Groom and Chase Bonin asking the same things in terms of, well, one, what's your favorite comedy album or special? And also pretty much like, what's your favorite joke? If you could take a joke from a comedian and make it your own, what would it be?
Oh, yeah, the joke. Okay, what is my favorite special or album? I want to think. It varies. So it's hard. I mean, like Kristen Shaw is my favorite comedian. Her live at the Fillmore special was really meaningful to me. I saw her work on it because I really liked her at the time. And then what you saw, which was this sort of like really mixture of sort of like an Andy Kaufman-y stunt the sort of blending of real life and stage persona, but also this idea of joy all at the same time. I was really special and inspiring. It like this was probably 7 years ago, before like a lot of people were working hard to have interesting specials. Like now people are like thinking hard about like what their comedy is and what they want to do. Even like people who you think of as like not intellectual comedians are like trying to think about like, oh, it should be shot in this style for this reason. But this was like a really early case of someone like treating the special as a visual art form and like an experiment. And it has lots of funny jokes, and it's so silly and like a specific voice. So that is probably my favorite special. I mean, like Kyle Kinane makes me probably laugh the most, but his specials tend to be a little bit limited because they're Comedy Central, so they edit them really, really tightly, and like just sort of the cadence of his jokes. I can't totally remember. They sort of all blur, so I don't know which ones is sort of my favorite. But his first album, Death of the Party, was really seminal to me getting back into comedy. That and Hannibal's first album, My Name is Hannibal, whatever, were really seminal to me. Like, I had like a 8-year lull or whatever where I like was not into comedy as much, and those albums came out and I saw them live and I was like, they're amazing. My favorite joke, I feel like I used to have an answer. Like I have I don't know. I mean, I have so many that I will just rapid fire go through jokes that I think about often, because Mitch Hedberg has a joke. Why I once saw a wino eating a grape. I said, "Man, you have to wait." I tried to do it with no. Mitch Hedberg had it. "Man, you have to wait," and I was just like, I couldn't just like that. The world he created. Oh, now I remember. I do have an answer for my favorite joke. So, but there's that. Mike Birbiglia has a joke called Massachusetts about his which does the thing that is so incredible when a comedian can do this, and not a lot of people can do it, which is build the structure in a joke where by the end of it, it feels like an inside joke. And he's the best at it. The probably second best at it. Like oddly enough, is Hannah Gatsby, but she does it differently, and she's very clever about it. So what I often say is my favorite joke is from the Roseanne Barr roast. Anthony Jeselnik had a joke, which was, Roseanne, you're a tyrant or something. When you worked on Roseanne, everyone walked on eggshells around you because you would not stop eating eggs. And what I love about that joke, and like I asked Anthony about it, and he was sort of like, I didn't even think twice about that joke. But what I loved about it was it just sort of is so visual and such a small thing.
Mm-hmm.
And like I love how roast jokes can paint these worlds in such small amounts of words. Yeah. And I always love that, like when jokes feel like icebergs and you can just sort of tip of it. And that one felt like there's just so much to the sort of like world he's painting in that joke. There's a million more, but that is the one I think I often say is my favorite joke, just because I also like can't remember it in complete. Where like, I don't know, I love Nate Bargatze's dead horse joke, but like I can't remember the whole thing.
But you had not only did you know the joke, but you had great timing within it too. Like you had the pacing down.
Well, you could not stop eating egg. It was just like,
yeah.
It was. I mean, his persona is so obvious. Like his sort of his cadence is easy to copy.
Right, but you held back on the Mitch Hedberg one, but then Anthony Jeselnik you could fall into. But
I actually because I don't know why it is. I think I probably had been telling the Mitch joke longer, so I have sort of like started telling it out loud without doing with the cadence. Where I'm telling every time we do the Just Enough joke, I do it with a cadence
Mm-hmm.
because I may be more comfortable to do it. Um, there are Mitch jokes that I could do. I mean, like, you just know it. I think it's sometimes funny to not do it with a cadence and see what it still is as a joke. But the other one I always think of is I had a friend come up to me and goes, "Guess what I love? Mashed potatoes." It's like, man, you got to give me a chance to guess or whatever. But it's like he was such a like, you know, for as much as he's thought it was a one-liner, he was like such a persona and like rhythmic comedian.
Oh my gosh, yeah, he's one of the Sinbad's the comic that sparked the idea to become a comedian for me with afros and bell bottoms.
Really?
Oh yeah, the onesie and the earring, like I was the fun, like you were talking about. He has fun on stage. Seeing him have fun on stage in that special was like, oh, that looks fun. I'd like to do that. And then, you know, it takes several years to actually decide to pursue your dream, but that's what planted the seed, I think.
Was it partly that he was clean, or is it that you just saw it? Like, I always wonder with Sinbad, like, I know a lot of people, like, he was the only comedian that a lot of people got to watch because he was clean and famous in the 90s.
Well, I'm a clean comedian now, which was like a conscious decision starting out, is that I always just wanted to be clean so I could entertain more people, like a Brian Regan or like a Sinbad. But at the time, I think I was just younger, and it just looked like he was having fun, and there was like you know, his specials had like a theme going on behind it, and he was dressed crazy, so he just made it look like a fun activity and not just standing with a mic stand, you know, just projecting.
Yeah, no one's having more fun than that guy.
Oh my! And you got to interview him. I'm in talks with him. We've been going back and forth, but we haven't nailed it down yet.
Yeah, he's hard. He's a you can't keep him down. Like that. You know that about him. If you listen to him on other podcasts, he just goes. Mm-hmm. He can hang with anybody. It's incredible. I don't know if you listen to the podcast Hollywood Handbook, but it's a very insular word. A lot of people go on it and they can't hang. And he's just like jumped in like he's part of the show. And but his brain is so quick that you don't need to be there. And to me, that is not an interesting interview. So like, you have to be really conscious, like stop, do a follow-up question because he'll move on. And you won't actually get an answer. Mm-hmm. So he's wild though. His brain moves so quickly, and like the way comedians talk about seeing it, it's like wild. He was the first comedian that I ever saw.
Really?
Yeah. When I went to a family trip to Las Vegas. Not ever. Like I don't know what the first comedian, but like the first comedian I saw live.
Yeah.
We went to a family. We saw him, and I only remember like a joke he did that wasn't very good, but. I couldn't remember anything else about the show. I have no sense of how long it was. I know, like, I liked it. But, yeah, it's just wild. I think he's due for, I don't know, a comeback. I think people are ready for him.
Oh, and he's known to improvise a lot. Like, he's known to always do a different show and always mix it up, which is something that I strive to do, but I still get caught. I mean, I've been doing comedy 10 years, but I still can get caught in like the math and structure of comedy. But now I think I just released my first special, and I think getting that material out there has freed me up to follow that instinct more on stage of being a little more in the moment. But now there's a pandemic that kind of I released the special on February 1st. It was my 10-year anniversary. Yeah. And then I'm like, oh, here we go. Now we're going to start open field running again. And then now it's just like, oh, we're back. We're stuck here now. So,
yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting period for every comedian, but I think you in that case of like, I think after people put out their first anything, mm-hmm. which is like, here's a collection of what the audience told me I should do. And like throughout the years, I did a bunch of things, and this is what the audience said they liked. And sometimes you'll be brilliant, like you'll have a vision, and coincidentally, like the comedians put you in a box, and that box was what we call genius. But often it's just like, these are what they thought was good, and I was just trying to hang. And now it's the time where you're like, well, actually, like, what do I want to say, and why do I want to say it? And what is the goal that I want to get from it? Like, I now know I could put together an hour of things that people will find funny, which is, like, hard. That's part of the job, or it can be. But it's like, well, now I decided I want to be, like, great at this thing. opposed to being good at it. I want to be great at this. Like,
Mm-hmm.
well, then you need time to like, what is actually what I want to do? And that's hard. Some people can never do that. I think people, especially, it happens a lot in New York because there's so many shows that you can kind of like just get in a flow of like 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes. And you're constantly doing stuff about New York City and you're doing stuff about like topical stuff. And like, it's interesting to do topical and it's in the moment, but like, if you're just responding, you're never asserting who you want to be. But you can maybe find that on stage, but part of that just means becoming an interesting person
Mm-hmm.
or being a person that like has a belief of like what they want the world to sort of what world they're trying to convey. And I think it's good. I hope comedians use this time to like, well, now that I'm not dependent on the audience, let me just like think about what things have I not talked about that I like are actually novel. Like, especially because everyone's going to come back and have these pandemic jokes. You have the opportunity of not doing that. So,
Yeah.
like, even if you're not like a pen and paper person, like, think about, different things. And what have you not seen people do that you feel like should be talked about?
I'm always looking for the contrast or the inverse of what seemingly works for people in everything I do. And that was something with like the comedy special. Everyone's trying to like sell them to a network or a platform to get on. I was like, well, what happens if you do it independently and then try to sell it all yourself and do that? And I'm always looking for just like with this podcast, comedians are doing podcasts. Well, how could I do it differently? Oh, instead of trying to out funny the guest, I'll just do well thought out researched interviews. Yeah. And always looking for like a inverse to what the trend seems to be. So I'm sure it'll pay off in like 20 years.
Yeah, whenever 20 years, you'll get to do comedy again. And,
yeah, right.
I mean, I think about it constantly. It's just like it would be really interesting. There's a lot of comedians who talk about 9/11 really motivating them, and you saw like a generation of really good comedians that came about like about 10 years around 2011. You're seeing like what we think of as like a huge wave of great comedians, and it's like all after 9/11, all these people are like, time to actually pursue my dreams. And you had more people doing it, which meant more points of view, which meant like more people pushing each other. Like everything became harder. And you just got, what it was a boom of like incredibly good comedians. And now it just keeps on going, which is nice. But like these moments are a thing that I can remind people to like do work with integrity, do work with purpose. And I think that is a thing that gets lost a lot for comedians because so much of it is just trying to keep your head above water.
What do you think the effect coronavirus will have on comedy moving forward?
I don't know. I mean, it's impossible to even know when it will start again. I mean, like I think there's people really would like to see live comedy right now, and I think, but can't, at least in New York, especially. But and that dynamic is interesting, which is like people are going to come back and they're going to be really excited to do it, and I think it's hard. I mean, it's also like depends on how the election goes. Like not even like regardless of how political it is. It's just sort of like the elections are going to be on everyone's mind. It's like there's going to be all of that. But like in a year, depending on how the election goes, it will shape it. I mean, for example, I'm like, I bring this up because I'm like literally working on a book proposal, and part of it, it's like I'd be saying like I will not submit. This book is not done until at least a year after the next inauguration, because like you need that time to sort of look back upon it. But this is what I hope, which is comedians and audiences. It's a sort of like distance makes the heart grow fonder, and they sort of remember that they're doing this for each other, like that comedians want the audience to have a good time and they want to be deferential to like what would be make them feel better, or like what is useful for them. It's just sort of, it's hard to describe, but like I I think there's a certain vernacular that comedians have for audiences, like the killing and destroying all that stuff, which I get, but that is built out of a time period that does not exist anymore, in which where audiences are bad, and that audiences are stupid, and audiences don't know what good comedy is. That was like that vernacular came out of the '80s when like there was no comedy literacy whatsoever or comedy savvy, and comedians succeeded in spite of their audiences. And that cynicism still exists, and I understand why. But like, there's so many people who know more about comedy than ever before, who want good comedy, and are like, who want something from comedians. And I think comedians have taken that for granted. And I think audiences have been, there are certain audiences that I think are impatient with comedians in a way that they shouldn't be, or want all comedians to be the same thing, which I think they shouldn't be. And I hope when reunited, everyone just sort of is more patient with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And like, if a joke bombs, don't be like, you guys are wrong, you guys are idiots, which you see all the time, right? It's like, the audience is always right, the comedian's always right. Like, we're figuring this out together. It's a collaboration. It is especially, we're talking about stand-up, and stand-up jokes are a collaboration between the audience and the comedian. A stand-up joke without an audience is not a stand-up joke. It is a different thing. That's what we all agreed upon what this is. And it should be more of we should accept it as a sort of collaborative atmosphere. It's like, people don't talk about alt comedy and club comedy as much anymore. But I think the thing that was always lost about like what is good about a club, an alternative community, is the community aspect, which is like this feeling that the audience is part of the process. That is what makes stand-up special. So like, why are we turning our back on that? That like, this is the medium that truly is collaborative. Like, jam bands pretend they are, and jazz says they are, or whatever, but not really. You're still like kind of responding to a vibe where like literally material is defined by what the audience says works. So that's what I hope. I don't know if that'll happen. I mean, it's possible that like everyone will just be really scared and like no one gets any laughs, but I'm an idealistic person. And this is sort of like when I dream of what comedy is, it's like this sort of utopia where like, it's like we're all in a sort of commune of like creating this art together.
That was beautiful. That was beautiful. I'm going to put that on a plate and glaze it and then hang it.
Really big plate.
It'll be a platter. So on the inverse of positivity, actually this is a positive spin though, with Sirium asking, what is your concept of failure and how do you take setbacks?
My personal idea of it, or a failure state?
I think, yeah, your personal.
Let me think. It's, how do I think about failure? I mean, I don't feel particularly entitled to a lot, so I don't expect I'm not optimistic in terms of my expectations for myself. So I sort of don't get let down on personal things in that way. Sort of for everything else beyond myself, I sort of have these like grand beliefs of what things should be like, and I get incredibly disappointed when things don't live up to it. But I sort of like, this was all the third option of a career. I was trying to work in the music business. Like, writing was an accidental byproduct of me trying to work in the music business and try to work in the events business, and earnestly trying to work hard for that. And it just like didn't work. I was not a good fit for that industry. They didn't like me. I tell this story a lot, but when I got let go from working at a major agency,
William Morris,
like, William Morris, I was too sensitive to work. You're too sensitive to work here. You're too much of an intellectual. Live in Los Angeles. He's like, get out of here, get out of town, is what he said. So I feel incredibly fortunate that I get to do this. Anything around this, like, I think I'm not below, but beyond privileged that I have like these niche interests, niche abilities, and the marketplace had deemed them valuable. So like I've had certain opportunities that we're trying, but I sort of like just keep on doing. Like I realized along the way, like I used to be motivated by like feelings of needing for legacy and stuff like that, and wanting to leave a mark or whatever. And then somewhere along the way, I just sort of like accepted that I enjoy the work. Like, and I say that to sort of anybody about like what should motivate you. I mean, you can do whatever it can't do and motivates you what motivates you, but like you are happier if you're motivated by the work than the results of the work. So once I realized I like what I'm doing, as long as I keep on getting to do it, I sort of am not incredibly worried or incredibly affected by setbacks because I'm still getting to do it. You know, like I have a podcast that I have a career getting to do that I have complete control over what it is. That is more than most people who are creative get to say about the thing that they're doing. Like, I interview enough comedians to know that they have to compromise to get certain sort of things when they create TV shows or whatever. And that sucks. And they want more things they can control. Well, I already have a career doing that thing. So I think that is what I remind myself with. I don't get down. I'm a pretty medium person, so I don't get particularly up in terms of my mood. I do not get like crazy excited. I like I never get to a 10. I don't usually get to a 1. I'm usually between 4 and 6, often at a 4. So that doesn't really help. But in terms of what the advice would be, it would be like, as long as you like doing it and are not like, it's even the same thing with before I got a career writing. I was like, I like writing. I at least have a hobby for the rest of my life. I think people like are not. I don't know when we decided hobbies are not allowed and that they can't be meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
But like, if you like have a means of expression, but it's not what you get paid to do, like that is 100% okay. That is like what most people did. There's a lot of great artists who did it as like their side gig. Like, just like remind yourself that you're doing because you like creating it, and then the failure of it doesn't matter as much because that's not like why you're doing it.
I love it. Oh, and Carter Ashton Bryant says, "Love, good one." So we're spreading the love here.
Oh, thank you.
So
Carter Ashton Bryant, was that his name?
Yeah, Carter Ashton Faber Bryant. He actually booked me in Arkansas last year. Actually, he's been a member of the Hot Breathverse for several years.
That's great. What a name.
That's solid. Yeah. Well, I mean, Jesse David Fox, that's a strong name. That's quite a
boom. Yeah. I mean, but his name is like all last names. I think my name does work, and I do think the rhythm of it works. It is like it does have a sort of like set up punchline-y thing of like da 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 da.
Mm-hmm.
Probably why I went by it. I mean, I first went by it for SEO reasons, but
interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and then like I went by SEO reasons, and then I had a roommate. This was almost 10 years ago. I was like, does it sound too pretentious? Like, it's okay to be pretentious. You're trying to be a writer. I was like, yeah. And then I think it sort of worked. I think it does make me seem more robust than I am.
Oh, you're a tastemaker. I mean, you're an authority in this industry. So, I mean, you have a right to think your opinion matters because it really does. And it moves, moves mountains in a lot of ways.
That's true. I guess if people like, no one cares what you think. I was like, well, literally, that's not true because like people have agreed to like employ me to write those opinions, and people like go, "Thank you for this opinion. This is very useful." And I try to. I mean, like that is, that I did recently when I did that list of stand-up recommendations. I was like, I need to make. I was like, this has to be useful, and I want to use my authority not to tell people like what's good or bad, but like I know. I can see comedy in enough ways of like I can make people find comedians they wouldn't think to listen to because how people recommend recommend how people recommend comedy, I think, is tremendously lacking. Um, So, I guess I don't take my authority lightly, is what I would say.
And how has that response been in the actual industry? Because this ties into Justin Williams' question, who actually said, "My full name is Justin Philip Gordon Patrick Williams." So,
Wow.
yeah.
Those are all strong middle name options if you wanted to go by three names.
But his question ties into your influence in the industry. And I'd also like to know a tag on the inverse of this. But he says, have you gone to comedy clubs or got to sit in the green room getting the VIP treatment? And I would also think of like the opposite, where have you gotten where they're like, oh, you don't like my special? I'm not worth the list? Things like that. So like, have you seen both sides of that?
Yeah, I mean, I have never really written much negative, and that is not because I don't have negative opinions. I just sort of like I'm not good at it. I don't think my opinion about what I think is not good is interesting as much as I think of things as failings. So I think there's so much like when I don't write that many reviews, which is why I don't think of myself as a critic too much. But the only time I really wrote things negative was from people so big that I think it was built on the understanding we already know that they're good. So like I can write things negatively hypothetical about Dave Chappelle because like there's a certain amount of understanding of like who already is. I don't know. I've never met Dave Chappelle. I can't imagine he has much interest. I'm like friendly enough with Neil or people who like Dave Chappelle. I've had comedians talk to me about things I think I wrote about Dave Chappelle, which was interesting conversations. It was sort of like I wrote a negative thing about a show, and they're like, it was hard to read this because I saw a person kill it. And I'm like, yeah, but it's hard for comedians to do this. It's one of the hardest things for comedians to understand, which is like, just because like people are laughing does not mean you're doing a good job. Like you're doing the job, but like I was talking to Hannah Gatsby, how controversial she is, and she has a story about seeing Jim Jeffries tell these really harsh jokes about lesbians, and being in the audience for that and laughing because you're compelled because you're part of an audience, but also like it's more you feel more safe to laugh than to not laugh. So there's a bit of that, which is like, oh, just because they're laughing actually might mean you're doing a bad job. It means you're like having people laugh at jokes they don't agree with, not because you're doing something magical. It's that you're just sort of manipulating the audience in a way that is like less artful and more just sort of like peer pressure. All to say, no one's confronted me. We're like, you said something mean.
Cool.
I only go to the green room if I know them kind of well. And there's not tons of comedians who I like say are my friends. And even the ones that I do say are my friends, like I will more likely say hello to them afterwards than like hang out during the show. And also I don't want comedians to know that I'm there hypothetically because I don't know. I think it'd be so weird if they did crowd work and they're like, hey, what do you do for a living? And I'm like, oh, I'm one of these people. But the closest is if I do festivals, if I do my podcast at festivals, I will be then in the mix. And then I sort of like will hang out with people in those contexts. I mean, probably the closest was I went backstage at Montreal for Roast Battle. And I like was in the green room talking like Jeff Ross with like a lot of famous people, and I was like in the mix of that. But it's I don't know, like I it's not that it's like only for journalistic integrity reasons of like, oh, I can't be friends with comedians. How would I be able to report from? It's mostly like I don't like talking to people that I don't know really. So it's like I just don't want to sit around and be awkward. Like then I don't want people like, what are you doing here? Like I think that is the bigger reason. Like people want to hang out with their friends.
Yeah, cool. Nice. So let's two more here. Dos más. And this one we can actually let me see if I can answer this one. And maybe if you have Imri's asking, have you ever tried stand up? Now, you tried it once, you got laughs, realized, okay, I'm not the laugh fiend like all these comedians. I'm glad I got it out of my system, but I'll just stick to officiating weddings. Is that the gist? Is there anything I'm leaving out with your stand-up experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think the truth is, before I did stand-up, I had done story reading things as a writer in New York gets asked to do, and I try to write those as funny as possible. Like, I think the more relevant question is have I tried to like do things funny? Like, because yes, I did stand up once. I don't think it was too revelatory to my process as a interviewer or understander of comedy.
Where'd you do it? Where was it at?
I can't remember the name of it. It was like this show in Greenpoint. It was just like a
Oh,
show.
it wasn't like
It was
a club or
not,
anything. Okay.
no.
Gotcha.
It's a place that had comedy, but like, but like, I have been trying to create comedy in different forms for as long as I really have been a writer. I mean, like, I got into writing as like a blogger primarily. So like, blogging is writing. It is like essentially writing. It's joke writing. It is having a premise, articulating premise, blah blah, writing punchline. I've like written scripts. I've written plays that have played for audiences, and so I have experience with sort of inner workings of writing comedy and my own personal relationship to how to think about it, and that I think is necessary for me as an interviewer is to be able to think about what creating feels like and the way in things manifest and sort of the relationship between having a big idea and having small ideas and how they relate. Like, oh, I want this piece to be about, I don't know, connectivity, and then, but like ultimately, it's like a workplace comedy about whatever. Or you wanted it to be about, like, that is like what the job associated with comedy writing is sort of like, how can I tell a story, or how can I do something that is small ideas, that small story that is about a bigger thing, without having to point a red sign that says like, this is the bigger idea. You can do that. I think it's less graceful. I think there is effect to that. I think a lot of people prefer that because they like to know what the thing is about. But like, if you watch Jerry Seinfeld's most recent special as an example, especially the first half, like, I think a lot of people dismiss Jerry Seinfeld as like just writing jokes about nothing, like writing jokes about small things and writing jokes about food or like these minuscule topics, and there's no substance behind it. Where if you are open to it, like, Jerry Seinfeld is a deeply existential comedian. Like, he's not writing about nothing, as in like no things. He is writing about nothing. He's writing about nothingness. He's writing about the meaninglessness of what we put meaning into. And he is underlining it. He goes like, these words that we decide matter, look how meaningless their meaning is. They are so flexible to a point that it is nothingness. Like, all of his jokes are about the things we decide to put value in that actually have no real value. And it's like, I mean, it's like, it is like any great existentialist work, but he is not saying, I'm an existentialist, this is my show, it's called Waiting for Jerry Doe or whatever, or like some play. It's just like, he's able to sneak that in, and I think that is really beautiful. And that is a thing that is, by creating, you sort of have that relationship. And I think a lot of critics think of what they do as creating in the same way. And I think of the interview as a show that I'm creating, the story that I'm telling.
Yeah.
So, but as a result, that means I'm exposed to the type of things that sort of creative people that are exposed to. I don't think like having to do stand up would feed what I need to do, which comedians have asked me before. And I often say, like, my job is not to understand comedians better, because I think I understand comedians enough. It's to best be able to explain comedians to audiences. And that means I need to be closer to the audience than the comedian. So spending years as a comedian, I don't think would actually make better, because then you sort of build certain sort of cynicisms or whatever that I don't think would be useful. Um, so that is an incredibly long answer to answer your short question, but I don't plan on doing it again. I haven't, I have done more story-y things.
Mm-hmm.
Someone's asked me to do one in quarantine. I don't know if I will, because as I think a lot of comedians have realized, like telling jokes about audiences, like actually is really embarrassing feeling. So I don't know.
Yeah, but you do have humor that you can weave in to good one, and like Blade Frank had tagged it up. He brought up like the laughing round. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
is it impossible not to laugh when you're explaining it to a guest?
That was once I had that idea, which was incredibly early on. That for the most part, the show was what I thought it was going to be at the beginning, except more. I didn't think comedians were going to give me so much time or give me so much. So I wanted the interview to be short. I didn't want it to be like so enveloping of the person was, and I realized that is actually sort of part of what's in the show. But once I had the idea for the laughing round, the name, regardless of like what it would be, it's when I was like, this show is me. That's when I like really embraced the show, because like otherwise the show felt like it only sort of captured how serious I was or how thoughtful I was or how heady I was. And that was part of me, but I felt like I think of myself as a particularly silly person, and a particularly stupid person. And I wanted the show to sort of be able to represent more of me, and that contrast I think is really funny. So so every time I do it, I know the comedian doesn't know it's going to happen, and it comes at the most unreasonable time, because I ask usually the most serious thing. They say sort of this like, oh, hopefully some beautiful, poignant thing that ties everything together, and then like now I say some dumb pun that doesn't really work. It's so confusing to them. It's not funny to most of them. Like some people like it a lot, but very few. Oddly enough, the people I feel like who like Tim Minchin really liked it, but most people are like nothing, which is the funniest. Some people like play along and they get the joke is bad, so they underline the joke is bad, and some people like laugh because they know that I know the joke is bad. But when I get nothing, it's so funny because they're just like, so that's funny that I don't know, and it's funny when I'm embarrassed to do it because I know they won't like it. Like I knew Chelsea Peretti would hate it, or I know Natasha Leggero hated. I think when I said it, because she had listened to the Moshe episode before she agreed to do it, and I knew when I said it, it was just like not cool, and her whole thing is that she's cool, so I knew she wouldn't like it. And she's like, "Oh, I guess I didn't know we get to this part." I was like, "Yeah, I know you didn't know that because you wouldn't agree to do the show." I was embarrassed to say it with Mark Maron, because he's just like these cool people. So that adds a new. But then once I realized that people like it, then it's nice, and I'm like, oh, this is a thing that people like. Then like, I don't think I'm not. I don't try to outshine these comedians in terms of how funny I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there is something. The contrast to me is just like funny in the abstract, regardless if it's like what makes you laugh. It's just like here's this person who has thought more about comedy than anyone you can imagine, and then like this is the lesson they learned is this joke. All of it is very funny to me. And yeah, and then it's just sort of like the rhythm of doing it. I think it's just like I'm so happy it's there, because otherwise, the show would just be like so serious and so unaware of itself that like I'm unaware that this is like first, like I think comedy has a hard time with earnestness and pretentiousness for obvious reasons. And like to be just like nonstop earnest would feel like out of step with what comedy is, and I think that's what like reminds people that like like I'm we're still aware of like what is like the job of comedy or what is the tone of comedy, or like it's just sort of like I think it punctures a certain balloon, and having it be every episode I think makes it so that I don't seem like some weirdo who like doesn't think comedy is funny and only like takes it as like sacred text.
Kaboom. And the final question from Wayne Flake Jr., and he asks, as a podcaster, okay, a podcast question. He says, as a podcaster, what is one major don't do and one major do? And, oh, he giggled at do. And how can Joel make Hot Breath Podcast the most respected comedy interview podcast behind Good One? I may have added that last one.
Sure. What not to do and what to do. I mean, it's hard. I mean, you have to know what your show is, right? So, like, if your show is not doing research and you do research, it'd be really weird. I mean, like, I think it's so I feel like you want a short answer for this of like, don't blank, do work hard. Okay, don't book the same type of person over and over again. I think that is a problem with comedy in general. I think it is a problem you'll see often with comedy podcasts, which is if you book the same type of person over and over again, they become less interesting. And same thing with shows. Like, and it's not like I always said part of the goal was to show the intra-diversity in comedy. And like diversity people like only often hear one way, which is like, oh, different races or whatever. But I'm talking about like all sorts of diversities, different types of comedians who do different types of things, who do different types of jokes, but also who have different backgrounds. Because like if you just have like 10 straight white male comedians who tell like ironic, edgy jokes that with the same cadence, none of them will seem interesting. But one of those people will sound interesting if you have them in the middle of a storyteller and a person who sings songs and a person who like writes sketches. Like, and I think you'll see that a lot of podcasts I respect don't try to do that. They don't try not to do that. I think a lot of them go like, hey, these are my friends. These are the people I can get. And it's like, work harder. Like, actually think about who your guests are. Think about the order of your guests. Like, I don't dismiss it. Like, actually think about how there's like your audience wants to find people interesting. And I think that is the thing that I think you see a lot. What to do. I mean, I guess that is also what to do, book different guests, but, be true to yourself. I mean, like, I think it's like, well, I think being true to yourself is really easy to say once you've found what yourself is, but be open to observing yourself. I always say, it says once in a tweet, which is like every interviewer should have the experience of being interviewed. And by that, I mean, they should go to therapy. But I do think the process of figuring out who you are and what you value is paramount in your ability to create work that responds to yourself. Like, I think, and like I started the show because I was interested in jokes, and I wanted to show people that jokes were hard to do or whatever. And then I also wanted to show that not all comedians were the same types of person. But as time has gone on, the show's become much more about my worldview and how special I think comedy is, and to sort of be a surrogate to show people how to treat comedy more specially, to get more out of it. And that's sort of like and that took a lot of work of trying to figure out like really what I want to get out of it. And I think that's harder work than to like always make sure you have a segment or whatever, which I think is useful. But I think the real answer is like really think about what you want this thing to be.
Yeah.
Like that's the only thing I know. Like there's people who will give you the exact opposite advice because they're like, trust your gut, right? There's trust your gut people, and they'll say trust your gut. Figure out if you're a trust your gut person or if you're think about who you are person, and then do that. If you're a trust your gut, don't do what I say. Do whatever feels natural.
Nice. And when it comes to your gut, what do you think, now that you have a context for this show, what we're trying to achieve here, where you're saying you want to create comedy literacy for fans, we want to create comedy literacy for comedians, but we're getting bigger name guests, but what can I do to help take this show to the level that I believe it should be at, which is at Just for Laughs Festival, at these different, like, credible, not that I seek that for validation, but just to help more comedians and to also, of course, build listeners so we can get Judd Apatow to sponsor this one like yours.
Yeah. I think you, like, find a network you can be a part of probably helps. Your guests are big enough that there probably is a network that maybe would take you on, but because cross promotion is probably the biggest way people find out about podcasts. Okay. And that's like it. I was always from the beginning attached to a major media company, so like there was a value in having me come to Just for Laughs, partly because me being there is useful. Because like I could moderate a bunch of panels. I'm like a experienced journalist. Mm-hmm. So like I had external validity that allowed my podcast to sort of exist even before it had audience. And like I now have been grinding it out. And I think to your goal of like making better comedians, like it is really about getting different types of comedians that, I think comedians do this especially, but all artists do it, which is you give advice based on your experience. And the problem is when your advice, your experience ends up being incredibly specific to you. Like people, certain comedians like, oh, you should be clean because then you could book more gigs or whatever. And then it's like, well, that only works if you're sort of naturally good at being clean.
Right.
And it actually will be harder for you. And the point is, like, the more people you book from completely different backgrounds that have completely different experiences will give different people different things they can latch onto and different paths they can try. Because, like, so many comedians will say, the trick is doing it as much as possible. But that is not how everyone did it. That's not how Jenny Slate made it. Jenny Slate did not make it because she did as much as possible. Jenny Slate was like kind of doing it once a week, but she was like living a life as an artist and like figuring out who she was because that's all she needed to do. Like there's these American comedians who are like, the only way to do it is to grind it out at clubs and do 10 shows a night. It's like, that's not how they do it in Australia. That's not how they do it in the United Kingdom. And like, who's to say that like, and yes, the best American comedians are maybe better than every other comedian, but like I wouldn't say that like tier C American club comedian is like better than Daniel Sloss or better than Ronnie Chang or better than Hannah Gatsby or better than any person who comes out of like a system where you're actually doing an hour first and you build the full show. Mm-hmm. Like maybe that's your thing. Like, and that doesn't mean that isn't your thing. I think like you have the ability to expose people to different things and not tell them comedy has to be this one thing. And that is the only way in which more people are going to be more satisfied in what they're doing is not feeling the need to have to paint themselves in one box, because not everyone's going to be able to do everything. But that doesn't mean what you're doing is wrong. Like, don't accept certain value systems just because the comedian you like most does it. That just might not be your thing. Mm-hmm. Like, there's nice comedians whose favorite types of comedians are harsh. And they just, like Jim Gaffigan's a non-political comedian who likes lefty political comedians. But he knows that's sort of not what he can do, and that's not like true to his art form. Like, eventually you sort of have to like give yourself more options and be like, oh, maybe that's my type of thing, and like try things out. And you have the ability to sort of like expose people to those things. So in terms of the service of the comedians, that's your best thing you can do. It's like try to get people from different scenes. I mean, because it's possible the one thing that a comedian needs to unlock everything is one writing technique that they haven't heard before. And people have the I ask almost every guest, what does writing mean to them? Because every comedian says they write jokes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like some people they write a word down and they write the other word. And some people, like Patton Oswalt, means he does the dishes and he thinks about a thing for a while. Or Ray Romano has an idea, he talks to his friend on the way to the club. He repeats their full conversation except for his friend's part. And then based on what they laugh, that's what he does. Or Maria Bamford gets coffee with one person and does her act for that person. Maybe that's what you need to do, person who's listening. So that is like what is like in terms of like your service to comedians, like that's probably what's going to be best. Also, be what's most entertaining. Because even if you disagree, it's like, oh, it's interesting that this is an option that's out there. There's so many ways up the mountain. But in terms of popularity, it's like, you just keep on doing it. You hope the people that are guests tweet at you. And then maybe, try to get trade ads with people.
Trade ads with people. Okay.
Yeah, like go to another podcast that you assume is as popular as yours and be like, I'll do an ad for your podcast if you do an ad for mine.
Oh, interesting. Okay, gotcha.
It's called ad swaps.
Ad swaps. All right, I will remember that because that I feel like is the next step of scaling this up to over 200 interviews with a lot of big name comedians. It's like, what do we got to do? So that'll be helpful. If advertising could be a thing, that's smart.
Yeah, I mean, regardless of like making money from it, but like in terms of getting audience, it's just like literally having people who listen to podcasts want to be told on other podcasts they listen to because they're already listening to it. Like written articles I have not seen do much, but like if you get a bunch of like appearing on other shows is probably also really useful. It's just like getting the word out through the other shows.
Gotcha. Perfect. All right. Well, this has exceeded expectations. I can't thank you enough for your time and this just comedy powwow we just had.
I hope this was interesting to these people.
Oh, now
I feel like your other guests are funny.
Now you sound like Seinfeld saying he doesn't think jokes are boring to other people.
Well, not that I think it's very interesting, but I don't know what people expect. Not everyone wants interesting. As I said, you have like very famously funny people, and I contend that I could be interesting about comedy. Would never suggest I'm as funny as funny people.
No, and comedians have come on here before. It's like, I wasn't really that funny throughout it, but the purpose of this isn't to be funny. There could be organically funny moments, but that's not the purpose of this. And people are saying, go ahead.
I do tell guests, if you think you're being boring, it's okay. I promise you people are finding it interesting.
Well, there you go. See, it's the same. Wayne said, great interview. Imri saying, thanks, guys, great interview. Jody, thanks, guys, great listen. Like, people love this, and
you're welcome. I thank you for spending so much time with me because I feel like it was very long, but once I get talking, I feel like it's fun.
No, I was in the moment with you. I was listening. It's great to connect with an interviewer of your level and ability. So even just to get to interacting through DM, I'm like, this is awesome. So this was
I know what you mean. I feel like a particularly regular person, but I understand that if you just know me as like a thing that seems so produced, right? Because we're editing me, not me sounding more normal.
Yeah.
Then I've been on podcasts where you're like, oh, this is what they're like regularly. Like, oh, they edit out all this. Everyone seems a little bit more human, where it's like, if you just hear me finish, like, wow, how did he think of all that stuff on the spot? I was like, well, I had people who assumed I didn't write down the questions ahead of time. And I'm like, you must think I'm like the smartest man on earth.
Yeah. Yeah, do you keep all of your notes and research? Do you have it documented somewhere?
I mean, it's all in Google Docs.
It's all in Google Docs. Okay, yeah. I have a notebook of all my show notes that kind of like I feel like will be a book someday or something.
Yeah, everything's in Google Docs, and then like obviously we make posts of the transcripts or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I've seen interviews who've done it with just like their brain. I'm like, to me that's impressive, but like, you want to be prepared. I mean, like,
of course.
So yeah, if anyone thinks that it's easy, I'm like, I mean, I'd probably not. I feel like everyone's like, this guy puts a lot of work into this thing.
Yeah. But it's worth it. Yeah, like you said, with the failure we're talking about, but you have to enjoy the work in order to like really
Yeah.
appreciate those failures as lessons. So yeah, this is now an official ad swap. Go listen to Good One. See what I did there? See what I did
Yeah.
there? But go listen to Good One. It's the like the gold standard when it comes to comedy podcast interviews. If you love this show, you're going to love that one, and most likely you already listened to it. They actually are now doing weekly. We're going to start releasing additional, beyond dissecting like jokes that are out now, but dissecting comedians that aren't even alive anymore and really getting into that, because your affinity for Robin Harris is like a little interesting to me. It's like there's a lot you're about to do with this show.
I could talk about Robin Harris forever. We have not done any of those episodes, partly because it feels like really morbid to do death-related things. So we've been waiting.
Oh, okay.
That's why, I've talked to certain comedians about doing episodes about comedians they like, but yeah, it feels like the vibe isn't right. Like, I feel like death is already too much in the air to be like, let's talk about how Robin Harris died before he got his big break.
But you're looking to diversify the content, and you're really looking to start rolling out more and thinking, I guess, beyond just like the normal format.
Well, I also think, as any indication of this interview, like, I think there's something. I think I am capable of talking about comedy in a way that is listenable, and the audience would probably appreciate it and/or create a deeper relationship with me. So, I think it's important to offer them that, to sort of like really build the show around like my point of view, opposed to just saying like, oh, Good One's the show where we do this one specific thing. Because like I did that episode with my coworker Catherine where we talked about best specials of the year, and I'm like, I think this was really interesting, and so I wanted more opportunities with that, because I do think it makes for a better show, like a fuller show in terms of full show experience, opposed to just like, oh, you have to come to the show to listen to the guests you already like. It's like, oh, the show's less guest dependent and more sort of my point of view dependent.
Any aspirations of doing video as well?
No,
okay.
not filming me. I would be in my head about it. I would like just be worried about where my hairline was the entire time. We talk about doing film things that are in the spirit of Good One, that use the same vocabulary, but not filming me doing interviews.
Perfect. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen of the Hot Breathiverse, let's give a round of applause for the one and only Jesse David Fox. Thank you so much to everyone that tuned in today, that asked questions. Go check out Good One. It's available wherever you listen to podcasts. Is there anything else you want to promote?
Nope. Do that. And if you do that, you'll hear about the other stuff I do.
Perfect.
I mean, follow me on social media at Jesse David Fox, and that'll be enough.
All right. Hot Breathiverse. All those will be linked in the show notes of this. And we will see you tomorrow with Ron Funches, everyone. So we shall be back tomorrow at 2 p.m. again. So until then, have a good day.